Hello, everyone. I'm Chris Goodwin with the Mississippi Department of Archives and History. Welcome to this week's History is Lunch program. We're in our home, the Craig H. Nielsen Auditorium, in the Museum of Mississippi History and Mississippi Civil Rights Museum. And we're streaming live on both Facebook and YouTube, where those videos are available to watch anytime afterwards. And if you've not already done so, please silence your phones. I note with sadness the death of Galen Mark LaFrancis. He and his partners Robert Morgan and Darrell White created two videos they presented at History is Lunch. Most recently, their Women of the Struggle, Facing Fear in the Civil Rights Era documentary. And before that, The Parchman Ordeal, 1965, Natchez Civil Rights and Justice. Our new temporary exhibit of rarely shown flags from the MDAH collection is open upstairs in the FedEx Exhibition Hall. And then this Friday, June 14th, is Flag Day. And to celebrate, MDH Director of Conservation Catherine Etry will give a gallery talk at 11 a.m. that day on the preservation of flags in the exhibit, so please come back for that. And then Sunday, June 16th at 2 p.m. here in the auditorium, we'll screen the documentary James Super Chicken Johnson, A Life in Blues. Following the screening, we'll hear from Director Mark Rankin, and then Super Chicken will perform. It'll be a lot of fun. Thanks to support from Ingalls Shipbuilding, these museums will offer free admission on June 19th in honor of Juneteenth. A Juneteenth Jubilee program from 4 to 7 p.m. will feature a variety of activities, including crafts, card and yard games, and Juneteenth-themed tours at 4:30 and 6:30, so come to that. And then I hope that you'll join us next week for History's Lunch, when we'll have Mary Coleman to present Race and Social Mobility in the Delta. Today, I'm delighted to have Modupe Labode and John Spann to present Marking Time, Mississippi's Civil Rights History. Sorry, that's the earlier title, Markers in Mississippi Civil Rights History. Sarah Campbell, Director of our Programs and Communication Division, is going to say a few words about them. Welcome.
Thank you, Chris. Welcome to our History is Lunch today. I'm delighted to be able to welcome my good friend, Modupe Labode, here. Modupe and I met 36 years ago or so when she was studying in graduate school at Oxford University. And so it makes me so happy I've followed her career to be able to invite her back and to be here with us today. Right now, Modupe comes to us as curator of the curator of African American social justice history at the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History. She chairs the African American History Curatorial Collective and is co-director of the Emmett Till Historical Marker project of the Center for Restorative History. As I said, she earned her PhD in history from Oxford University and her BA in history from Iowa State. She first taught history and she taught history and she taught museum studies at Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis, where she was also a public scholar of African American history and museums. And she has also taught at her alma mater, Iowa State. She was once the chief historian at the Colorado Historical Society, which is now History Colorado. After we have Modupe, after we hear from her, we're going to hear from John Spann, who is the Program and Outreach Officer for the Mississippi Humanities Council, where he manages grantees and oversees council-conducted programs such as the Mississippi Freedom Trail Marker Program. Many of you know John. He previously worked here at MDAH and was a member of the curatorial team for the two Mississippi museums when they opened in 2017. John earned his BA in history from Mississippi State University. So welcome, Modupe.
It ended up being switched, yeah.
Y'all do a switcheroo here.
They switched
Okay.
the order.
Yeah. Sorry.
Oh, turn it on. Thank you. Okay. Good afternoon. Can y'all hear me? Great. Okay. Thank you again, Sarah, for the introduction. I was glad to be here for History is Lunch. Working here, I never thought I'd be on this stage, and look at me now. Anyways, I'm John Spann, Program and Outreach Officer for the Mississippi Humanities Council, where Stuart Rockoff is our Executive Director, who's in the back. And we have had the distinct pleasure to work with Visit Mississippi to expand the Freedom Trail Marker program. Over the years when it started, they put together a committee, and it was actually ran by Visit Mississippi solely, and they put together a committee of scholars and civil rights veterans to basically put together a trail that told the civil rights story between Mississippi civil rights story between 1945 and 1975. Over time, that kind of waned, interest waned, and we were contacted by Visit Mississippi 2 years ago when they had a surplus of funds, EDA funds, and they wanted to see what they could do with those monies to ramp up the trails, because they managed the Freedom Trail, the Blues Trail, and the Country Music Trail. And so they came to us and they were like, y'all have contacts throughout the state. Would it be possible for y'all to help us revamp and expand the Mississippi Freedom Trail? And of course, we jumped at it because of our work throughout the communities, throughout all 82 counties. We had the capacity to reach out into the communities and try to build interest around markers and try to get funding to uplift stories that were probably not being told. And so we took that partnership on. We created a new committee of scholars, and some from the old committee, like Dr. Leslie McLemore, but we put together a new group to basically see what the need was and to also try to get an understanding of what counties that we needed to reach that weren't reached before. When we got it, the marker trail only had about 32 markers in it, about 33, 32 markers. And so since then, we've expanded we've added 37 new markers. So that's been y'all can clap for that if you want. So we've more than doubled the Freedom Trail. So I kind of want to get into what the essence of the council's role is, because it's easy to put a marker in the ground. It's easy to just say like this, the history happened here, but what's next, right? What is the community building aspect around the stories? And so thankfully, we had been working with folks like in Winona, like Bridging Winona with Vicki Roberts Ratliff. That was a community group that came to us for a grant opportunity a year before we even got into this work. And we funded them a grant to help tell the story of Miss Fannie Lou Hamer and the connection between Miss Fannie Lou Hamer and Winona through the Winona jail beatings that happened in 1963. Well, fast forward to the next year, they saw that we had EDA funds to give out to communities for a free Freedom Trail marker, and they wanted to actually put a marker in Winona to honor Miss Ylvester Simpson, June Johnson, Lawrence Guillot, and others, and Fannie Lou Hamer, who were beaten in the Winona jail in 1963. So not only did we work with Bridging Winona, we worked with the city of Winona, we worked with the black community there, the church there, and also with Miss Ylvester Simpson, who is the last living arrestee of that group, and a scholar by the name of Davis Houck, who is a professor of history at the Florida State University. Anyways, we worked for over a year with that community with trying to do research. Miss Ylvester Simpson actually helped write this marker, and we tried to figure out what was the best way to complement the community with this marker. And if it wasn't for folks like Vicki Roberts Ratliff and community organizations like the Bridging Winona nonprofit and the Land Literacy and Legacy nonprofit, we would not have done what we could have done in that community. So not only that, we've brought in the community, and then also because we're the Humanities Council, our main goal is to give grant funds, federal grant dollars, right? And so we are encouraging and working with communities to do programming that is funded by the Humanities Council to continue telling the story long after the marker is in the ground. Same thing, June 4th, we unveiled a marker that is in Ashland, Mississippi, and Benton County. I think it's one of the first ever in that area because the Hill Country project or the Hill Country Civil Rights movement is not really known. It's not readily told. And so we worked with people like Dr. Roy DeBerry and his community organization called the Hill Country Project. And we also worked with the Reeves family to help see what needed to be told, what stories were that needed to be uncovered. And the whole story about the Benton County movement tied into Mr. Reeves because Mr. Reeves revitalized the NAACP in that area, right? And then his story connecting to the Regional Council of Negro Leadership with T.R.M. Howard and the Delta and Mount Bayou also made a difference. So we worked together with community leaders like Dr. DeBerry and his team with the Hill Country Project to create this marker. And we actually put it at the intersection of Highway 4 and Reeves Road. And so it's literally on the property that Henry Reeves owns. And when we had the unveiling, there was like 3 or 4 generations of Mr. Reeves there to see that marker, plus black and white community members who wanted to see this story being told, right? This is something that had never been done. Like I said, the Hill Country Civil Rights Movement is kind of untold. And so to have this up there, right there at the intersection where people coming in to Benton County or coming into Ashland can see for years to come was a true testament to what the community itself could do. And we worked with, in Grenada recently, for the Grenada School Integration. We worked with the Grenada Community Freedom Movement Legacy Committee and Ms. Diane Freelon Foster. And Ms. Diane Freelon Foster and her group had a long-standing relationship with the Mississippi Humanities Council. And so it was really a no-brainer when she came to us and said, you know, we've been trying to tell this story of the Grenada School integration for a long time here, and we've had so much pushback and resistance to telling the story because a lot of the people that beat those young children when they were going to school are still living there, right? They have ties to the political government there. And so working with her to not have any barriers there's no money barriers, there's no any type of political barriers. We worked together to make sure that their story was told. And when we did that, when we unveiled that marker that day, the surviving students actually marched from the church where they were taking asylum, and they marched from that church to the school site in the same way they did before. It was very sobering and to see the community really take part in uplifting this history and remembering. At the ceremony when we unveiled the marker, we also did a roll call of the names of the people who have passed on but were a part of that ordeal. So this was another community effort that we worked with them on a reception afterwards where those living individuals who were part of that ordeal, were part of that really like beating when they were going to school, actually got a chance to tell their stories. And they did that with the backdrop of different videos that were taken during that time in the 60s, and they could recall, and they were actually pointing out, well, that guy right there, that police officer that's being interviewed, he was a racist. That guy right there, we know him, his family members live here, you know? So like that was really cool to share that and have them share their story, which probably has been silenced for quite a long time. Also, we worked with the communities on the coast in Pass Christian, with the city of Pass Christian, specifically Councilwoman Regina Charlotte, and the family of Lawrence Guillot. We actually worked with them because they wanted to tell that story, and we also thought as a committee that Lawrence Guillot is somebody that is unsung and should get their shine, and the coast needs more markers as well. And so we worked with them, and we actually unveiled that marker during the Guillot family reunion. And Lawrence Guillot's daughter and son were able to come and share in that moment. They were able to speak and really show. They were really, I guess, overwhelmed with the support of the community to say that, okay, your dad has passed on, but we still remember him. His story is not forgotten here in Pass Christian. And, you know, even though he was from Pass Christian, he did a lot of work throughout the state, and it's good to know that the community members there on the coast still recognize him, even though he went to Tougaloo College and he was in the Delta and this and that, but they still recognize him as their own hero. And then lastly, this was one of the first markers we did when we were partnering with Mississippi, the Visit Mississippi Tourism Agency, is the Natchez NAACP headquarters. Now, I don't know what's in the water in Natchez, but they are really moving down there. Their remembrance projects are popping up all over. They've got a USCT Colored Troops Remembrance Project going on right now to unveil a statue there. And so they were really on it. People like Roscoe Barnes and the Visit Natchez Tourism Agency were really working with us hand in hand. And they also have a remembrance committee that actually wrote the marker itself to honor the NAACP headquarters, Henry Metcalf, and the John Banks home. This marker actually sits in front of the John Banks home, on the property of the John Banks home, which was once owned by one of the foremost black physicians in Natchez. I think he was the first black physician in Natchez, and then his home eventually became the NAACP headquarters, where George Metcalf was the leader of the Natchez NAACP and worked out of that home. And so we worked with the John Banks staff, the community leaders, the city of Natchez to get this done, and the descendant communities were there to share in. As you see a picture of them with the mayor of Natchez up at the top, the top picture there. So this has been really true rewarding work to see descendant communities and communities all across 82 counties be empowered to tell their own stories. They're not being talked at, they're actually being empowered to share what they feel is important. And so lastly, we've got some unveilings coming up. As I said, June 4th and June 8th, we already covered with Henry Reeves and the Winona jail beatings. This week, June 14th, we will be uncovering a marker to honor Cheney, Goodman, and Schwerner, the Neshoba County jails, but we changed it to the Neshoba County murders, and that's going to be at the McClellan Cafe at 245 Carver Avenue in Philadelphia, and that's going to be at 11 o'clock. June 28th, we're going to uncover a marker honoring the Ladner sisters in Hattiesburg. That's 507 Mobile Street in Hattiesburg, and Dr. Joyce Ladner will be there. And as you know, Miss Dory Ladner passed away recently this year, and so it was kind of sad to know that she wouldn't be able to see it, but at least we know that we're getting it done. And she actually did have a part in writing the marker herself. And editing it. So that was a great thing. And then the next day, June 29th, Dr. Benjamin Murphy will be honored in Laurel, Mississippi at 4 o'clock at 118 Oak Park Boulevard. And to culminate, I guess, like this summer thing, we've got unveilings coming up in July as well and the rest of the year, but we want to highlight the August 20th unveiling, which will be in Atlantic City. This is the first marker unveiling outside of the state of Mississippi. And it will be in New Jersey and Atlantic City to honor the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party and their effort in the 1964 National Convention. So let's get that's amazing, right? And we're going to try to bring Dr. Roy DeBerry, Dr. Leslie McLemore, and Mrs. Uvestra Simpson, who were all a part of the MFDP during that time. And Dr. Leslie McLemore was a delegate. Also, Dr. Roy DeBerry was there as well as a young kid marching on the boardwalk. And so to have them do a full circle moment as they were once, protesting on the boardwalk and now coming to see this marker come to fruition and see that their work was not in vain is truly, truly, I guess, just like empowering to them, but also to show them that their work wasn't in vain and that their legacy of civil rights, not just in Mississippi, but across the nation, will live on hopefully forever. So that's a little bit of what we're doing with the Humanities Council. If you want to know more about that, email me. We can ask questions afterwards, but thank you all for your time.
Thank you very much, John. That's pretty amazing. And I'm really happy to be here in Jackson. It's been a very long time since I've been here. And thank you for the intro, Sarah. And I'd also just like to thank the Mississippi Department of Archives and History for a really generous, for this series, but also just for this really hospitable welcome. So a little bit about my roadmap for today. I am going, because I have had experience with markers and I am a curator at the National Museum of American History, I want to say a little bit about historic markers themselves, kind of like a bird's eye view of what historic markers can and can't do. And so although I might sound a little critical, I'm actually very supportive of historic markers, but I want to point out sometimes how hard they are to do. And then I'd like to just kind of open to say, what happens when a historic marker goes into a museum? So I'll be talking about that. So this is an image from an NPR story about historical markers. And one of the things just to remember about historical markers is at their very, very basic, they're a medium for interpreting history. So you can think about them with all these different ways of interpreting history, such as monographs, popular books, articles and magazines, textbooks, documentaries, either audio documentaries, podcast, video documentary, exhibits, live interpretation, tours. So they share a lot of just what it means to do history in that way. So whoever does history, they have to identify a topic. They have to really narrow it down. So if you've ever seen the script of what an interpreter does, or to me, when I've seen the scripts from a documentary movie, it's amazing how few words there are and the kind of direction that's involved. So you have to focus on the topic, create an interpretation. So that means you have to have a view. You can't just say every single thing that happened, because if you're like, if you've been in touch with people who tell you every single thing that happens in their lives, you know that that is not, you might love them, but that's not the most compelling way to tell a story. So there's a lot of sorting out that goes. And also, most people are relying on a lot of other sources. They're relying on books, on oral histories, on narratives from newspapers that actually might be quite hostile. So there's all these other things way behind a historical marker. So historical markers are a form of interpreting history, but they're also an important form of public history. So we're in a museum right now, the two Mississippi museums. That's a great example of public history work. It also is a way that people do history, but they're doing history not just for myself or for themselves or for their family, but doing it to inform a wider public. And also, historical markers take many forms. There's signs of all different sizes, bronze plaques, and they're usually in public areas or semi-public areas. So like a semi-public area, when I was in Milwaukee, because I love historic markers, I found a plaque in a hotel that commemorated where Theodore Roosevelt survived an assassination attempt. So the marker had originally been outside, someone put it in a lobby, kind of out of the way, but it's like, my goodness, this is where that occurred. So historical markers often have lots of different attributes that I'll just run through here. And I think this, if you look up this story, I think it's a really great graphic story of just like what it takes to do historic markers. So some have been carefully researched, and others they look really official, but the history they convey is not profound, or sometimes just wrong. So sometimes they commemorate, sometimes they boast, and I will show you an example of a not very good historical marker that the Indiana Historical Bureau also says it is not a very good historical marker. But others, as the NPR was saying, have been used to spread lies or hate. So I don't know if if Nathan Bedford Forrest is currently the most commemorated person on a historical marker. But last time when there was a survey, I think in 2010, he was more than George Washington, more than Thomas Jefferson, more than Martin Luther King. Nathan Bedford Forrest was commemorated on historical markers, not only in Tennessee and in the Deep South, but also in Oregon, also in Iowa. So that shows like how historic markers can travel and they can create their own myths. So I just want to say a little bit of attributes of historic markers that you might want to think in as kind of keeping in mind the stories, the wonderful images that John just showed, just kind of went behind that. So one of the things, historical markers are one of the most expensive kind of ways of interpreting history. They cost thousands of dollars oftentimes, and often they require specialized creators or fabricators. So if you ever talk to people doing historical markers, they say, well, I got this estimate from the fabricator. So they have to talk to someone who actually knows how to do this, to create a marker that will withstand the sun, all sorts of different things. They also are made out of material that you don't normally see. Most of us don't have access to bronze or vinyl, which also means, as I know from very, very painful experience, that when you make an error, when you make a mistake, when you have the wrong date, it is very difficult to correct that. Also, you make people extremely upset because they've talked to you. They've said, like, how could you get that name wrong? So correcting that is often very expensive. The location is in public spaces, but oftentimes you need to get permission to put in a historical marker. If you put it on land that you own, that's fine. But if you put it on land that somebody else owns, you need to ensure that they're not going to decide one day that they don't like that marker and that they're going to have their friend plow it up. So a lot of times there's agreements that need to be signed. And a lot of the historical markers are by roadsides, which is great because people see them while they're traveling, but that also means that sometimes historical markers can be subject to accidents, such as when a snowplow backs over them. And that also entails filing an insurance claim to explain that this marker was destroyed when a snowplow backs over them. So those are some of the things that are going behind the scene by whoever is establishing the marker. Markers are also in place for an extremely long time, longer than most exhibits, longer than most books remain in print. You can see historical markers that were put up in the 20s or 30s, sometimes even the 1800s. So this means that whoever is being commemorated that may have been really important in a town like Davenport, Iowa, sometimes people don't remember who that person is 50, 60, 100 years later. But it also means that outmoded interpretation can last for a very, very long time. And speaking of the interpretation, it's often very brief. Sometimes there's words, sometimes there's maps and images, but usually you're thinking about hundreds of words as opposed to thousands of words. Like when you listen to a tour guide, if you were counting how many words they were saying, they're using gestures, they might be using songs, they might be using a lot of different ways to convey their message. A historical marker kind of just sits there quietly. Sometimes it has images, but its words are in the hundreds, not in the thousands. Also, because they're so brief, it means that there are things that are going to be left out. That's inevitable. But sometimes what is left out, is it because of malice? Is it because of denial? Or is it because they needed to focus the story? Sometimes that's not always clear. And also, historical markers convey a great deal of authority, regardless of who put them up. If you look at, I think, being in bronze, having images, they might have seals on them. Sometimes it's very difficult to tell who put up the marker, but I think many people trust them when they see them. And that's when erroneous or false history is up. It can be very damaging because it looks just the same if you see a United Daughters of the Confederacy marker that is commemorating a Confederate general or commemorating a quote-unquote loyal slave. Those look very similar to a marker commemorating some of the events of civil rights activists and so on. So actually reading and understanding it is extraordinarily important. So after I'm listing these factors that make you very worried, I want to also emphasize why I think historical markers are amazing. And one of that is because of where they're placed. When you engage with a historical marker, I think I certainly feel that I want to look around. I want to talk to the people I'm with. I want to have further conversations based on this. But the issue of where it's placed and the events it's commemorating, I think, are extraordinarily important. One of the really basic principles of interpreting history is thinking about continuity and change. And when you're looking at a historical marker, it's almost like a portal to the past. You're reminded, even just as John was talking about the marker for the Winona beatings, you're thinking about what happened then. Most people, a lot of people in this room weren't alive. You may not have heard about it, but you might remember where you heard about it. Thinking of who was hurt, why they were hurt, how they persisted. These are extraordinary stories here. So the site-based aspect of the interpretation is very important. And the other aspect is that it's engaging your historical imagination. It might be thinking about how you are a historical actor, how people you know and you care about are also historical actors. I also think historical markers are amazing because of the flexibility in their interpretation. I've read markers about physicists, about chemists, some people that I may not have really cared about until I learned what they did in a certain place. That kind of launches a person into further areas of inquiry. And also, visitors can control their interactions. They can come back over and over to a marker. They can take friends there. Usually they're free because they're open somewhere. You don't have to ask someone for a key to see it. And you might actually be telling even more stories as you take pictures of them. So these are some of the aspects of what make historical markers really interesting and I think important. But I also wanted to note how people are taking on some of those challenges. Now, I mentioned, this is a bad historical marker. It's in Indianapolis where I lived, and I think what is so important is that the Indiana Historical Bureau also says it's a bad historical marker. So I'm just going to read the text. It says, North Meridian Street Historic District, listed on the National Register of Historic Places, 1986, in the quote, one of America's great streets. Okay. I think you might be saying, why did you even read that? Why did they pay thousands of dollars for that? What is that supposed to tell me? And I don't think you'd have to be too cynical to say this is a marker commemorating, the governor's mansion is actually very near to this marker. The marker doesn't say that, but that's one of the reasons. It was historically a very wealthy part of Indianapolis, not so much anymore. But one of the things that I really love that the Indiana Historical Bureau has done is that they provide annotations about their markers online, so that they provide the sources, they provide what has worked, what hasn't worked. And one of the things I'm just going to kind of note here here is they say, this marker does not provide enough information to establish the topic's historical significance, period. And I think that's as close as you're going to get in government language to say this marker was a mistake. They also talk about even further, they say they have a quotation, but nobody made that quotation. They can't find that quotation anywhere. So for various reasons, they're not taking it down, probably because it's very difficult to take down a historical marker in many contexts. But what I love is that they're giving people information to say, if you want to actually research more, here are some directions for doing that. And by the way, your initial reaction to say, I don't know what that marker's about, is absolutely correct. This is a historical marker that I went to, I guess last May, and it's in Memphis. It was the birthplace of Aretha Franklin. So you could see the house in which she was born. it really conveys a little bit about the neighborhood. It is talking a little, you can see that the houses that are quite large. You can see this is a very small house, but as you can see, it's behind a chain link fence. And in that case, the context is saying, although her birthplace is considered to be important, and the marker is done by the city of Memphis, the land itself has changed over time. There has been disinvestment. There were clearly people around. When we went there were lots of people living nearby. But you start raising questions like, why is the city of Memphis put a marker up, but why don't they have the house? How does Memphis commemorate its own? How is Aretha Franklin commemorated in Detroit? These were some of the questions my friends and I had when we looked at this, and I have to say it was a little bit sad to see this marker in this place. But what you could see just in the background is a lot of flowers. And so one of the things that we saw there was people continually sticking, there were lots of bouquets, some of them really fresh, it looks like they had just been left the day before. And that also, when I say about the historical imagination, it makes you part of a much larger tradition. We don't know who left those there, but we felt, like I said, I'm glad that they're actually giving Aretha her flowers, literally and figuratively. So I also just want to note is that there's lots of people who are doing really amazing work trying to put markers in a much larger context. And one of the ones that you may have heard about is the Equal Justice Initiative in Montgomery, Alabama. When they started, as some of you may have been to the Legacy Museum, but the historical commemoration that first started there was with marking Montgomery's place in the domestic slave trade. And amongst historians, amongst public historians, this was actually kind of a sea change because there weren't that many markers talking about what people sometimes say history's more difficult aspects. It took till 2013 until the EJI really kind of showed people the way of how you can lay out within a city its history. And as you can see here, the people who are here, including Brian Stevenson, people don't seem angry. They see that there's kind of acknowledgement of the role that this history plays in creating the US. Also, as the EGI has also been involved in marking sites of lynching around the country. And it's an amazing project. And I mean that like I'm amazed that they actually have been able to do it. It's been extraordinarily difficult because a lot of that history has been either hidden or kind of couched in all sorts of falsehoods. But I think because of their support for communities, their real interest in community engagement, the EGI has been able to portray a different way of looking at some really difficult aspects of US history. This marker might be very familiar to many of you, of Fannie Lou Hamer, and one of the things that I want to note about it, it's in the Memorial Garden in Ruleville. And I haven't seen anything like that Memorial Garden, especially something dedicated to an African-American woman. There are very, very few monuments and historical markers nationally to Black people, fewer to Black women. And what I loved about this Memorial Garden was just the layers that you went through there. So you have the Mississippi Freedom Trail marker that you see here. On the back, there are images and signs. But not only that, there is a monument to Fannie Lou Hamer, showing her speaking into a microphone. it's hard to convey how few figurative sculptures there are of Black women in public space, but you see her kind of doing what she's, invoking people to action. You also have the graves of Fannie Lou Hamer and Perry Pap Hamer. And in many ways, that felt my friends and I were looking at it, it felt very, very comforting, very like they are here with us now. And then there is a shady place that is very much needed that shows activists in civil rights activism. Their names are inscribed around that. It's not quite a rotunda, but in the circle around there. So people whose names were completely unfamiliar to me. But as we know about activism, that it's a communal activity. It isn't just one person leading things forever. There are definitely extraordinary people like Fannie Lou Hamer, but it's a communal activity. And so the layers and layers and layers of commemoration, of which the historical marker is a central aspect, I think are one of the things that, like I've said, I can't really recall anything else like that. So if there's people out there who want to elevate more things about Fannie Lou Hamer, I would suggest letting more people know about this. So with that in mind, I'm going to just switch in the last few minutes to talk about what happens when a historical marker goes into a museum. And the historical marker that is in question is the Riversite Historical Marker that the Emmett Till Memorial Commission, now the Emmett Till Interpretive Center, donated to the National Museum of American History in 2019. So the people who worked on that project were, I had just started at the museum, so I was not directly part of that. It was two curators, Nancy Burkow and Sion Wold-Michael. And when they had heard about the marker of the Riversite that had been attacked and destroyed many, many times, and that the efforts of people in Tallahatchie County to put it back up. And so there was some interest in the National Museum of American History about having that marker taken into the Smithsonian's National Collection. And what I mean by national collection, saying that it is so important, it tells a national story. So they spent several weeks traveling in Mississippi. They came to this museum. They went to Tougaloo. They talked to people all over in their networks. But one of the things that came through about whether or not this object, historical marker, should be in the National Museum of American History. And what came up several times was saying, yes, it should, but only if it tells a Mississippi story. So people were well aware that, that a lot of times nationally, Mississippi is often portrayed in quite negative lights, but also, and they knew of the activity. Many people are related to people doing activity to commemorate Emmett Till in Chicago. But what they want, and especially the Roberts Temple, but what was meant, I think, by telling a Mississippi story was not only the life and afterlife of Emmett Till in Mississippi, in Tallahatchie County, the neighboring counties, but also the efforts of people in Mississippi to keep that story alive while that history was being actively suppressed. And how telling that story, making sure that people knew about it, took decades. And that that official commemoration wasn't really possible until there were Black elected officials put in place. So the story of power, the story of whose story gets told, and also what Emmett Till means in Mississippi, is something that the museum has tried to keep in place as the interpretation occurred. So I'll just note that this is the second time this marker has been exhibited. The first time was in 2021, and when it was exhibited in in the museum, kind of in the plaza right in front of where you go to see the Star Spangled Banner. So it was really kind of a question that many people ask: what is America? Is this America? Looking at the Emmett Till, the historical marker of the river site. But as I was asked to be part of the co-curator for the second installation. So as a co-curator is more like a project manager. So I was not changing the interpretation at all. But what I was asked to do was to see how we can get this marker up in April 2024, and then taking it down in September 2024. But as we were discussing the reinstallation of the marker, we were thinking about aspects of, again, of how to tell the Mississippi story. So if you look online, you will see several images that have been of the marker in place near Tallahatchie County. You'll see an image of University of Mississippi students parading the marker in front of the Confederate monument. And the photographer who took that image is right here, Susie Altman. You will also see images of the Bryant's grocery store. So trying to have those in there as a context. But we also knew that we were removing this marker is removed from space, the kind of thing I was so excited about what makes historical markers important. And that we are, by removing it from space, we're also removing it from other parts of the narrative. So people here in the audience, people in the South more generally, are quite aware of the struggle for Black activism in the Mississippi Delta. But what we found was that many people, what we've been finding, I should say, is that many people who go to the National Museum of American History, when they see that image, they don't know who those people are. So I think that shows much wider how this aspect of US history has been either suppressed or marginalized. So we chose that image from a really wonderful image of Mamie Till and her son. And I think partly because we wanted to say that this is an exhibit about Black history, if you've been to the National Museum of American History, I'll say that right now, this is the only exhibit that is up that is featuring Black history. So we wanted to say that this is about Black history. We also wanted to make sure, one of the things that the kind of insistence we got from the community was to say, you need to keep remembering this, is reminding people this is a Mississippi story and that they don't know what Mississippi is. So, which is true. So this is the title. It's in Spanish and English, which is what the museum is doing now, and which has been interesting because when we've taken some groups of school children, there are lots of Spanish-speaking kids in the DC areas, and it's been really interesting to see them be able to read this in a language that they're comfortable in, because a lot of these concepts don't translate, literally don't translate that well. This was a new label that people in Tallahatchie County working at the Emmett Till Interpretive Center actually created. So it took there was a lot of discussion, and one of the things they were trying to allude to is that working to commemorate Emmett Till's memory is not just the only thing that people are doing. It's part of a much, much larger story. As you see, this is the space. It's only an exhibit of one object. And one of the things that is kind of meta about this is that people are reading the language that the Emmett Till Memorial Commission put up. And it's very factual. Recommend you go to the the website and read it, the Emmett Till Interpretive Center website and read it, it's very factual. It says what happened, and it's one of a series of markers about Emmett Till's murder. And then you see the bullet holes, and you see the extraordinary violence. And one of the things that I have to give a lot of credit to is the object conservators. So those are the people who work very carefully to preserve an object. And one of the things they wanted to do was to make sure that people knew the violence of those bullet holes. But as you read throughout there, the other thing that we wanted people to know is that this occurred, that the sign was near the Tallahatchie River, as that video is, but also that, that it was community activism that created the sign and put it back over and over and over, and is continuing activities such as around Emmett Till, such as numerous curricula at the Emmett Till Interpretive Center, but also the Till Academy in Drew, and that that students at West Tallahatchie High School are doing documentaries about Emmett Till in their journalism class. So we wanted to make sure that this isn't just kind of a story about passivity, but how this history is alive today. So you can decide for yourself what the differences mean when a marker is in an exhibit or in the public space, but I just wanted to show those different examples there. And I know I've gone a little bit long, so I want to have time for questions. And John, I didn't know if you wanted to come up here too.
Great job.
We do have a few
Great job.
minutes for
Yeah.
questions. If you have a question, you can raise your hand. We'll bring the microphone to you.
Wonderful presentation by both of you all. Hello, John.
Hello.
Good to see you again.
Good to see you.
And good that unknown stories, unsung heroes, and events are being focused.
Yes,
I
ma'am.
got one that I've been talking to you about.
I know.
The Goodman story with Howard Cooper.
Uh-huh.
And I think you met the family, and it's documented. The story is documented with Mind State on Freedom, and he's in Thunder Freedom as well.
Okay.
So I'll be reaching out to you.
Please do.
About a Freedom Trail marker there, because I know they're interested and they are organized. Thank you.
Great, great. Oh, oh.
Okay, I was glad to see that you have a memorial for Dr. Murphy on the 29th.
Yes, sir.
My question is, Susie Ruffin at times worked with Dr. Murphy
Okay.
and her contributions there, and I'm hesitating because I think at times there was some friction there also with anything that's going to be said with Susie Ruffin with the things that she did with Dr. Murphy.
Now, with the marker itself, it was written and edited. It was written by one of our writers, but it was edited by the community leaders. So the Mayor Johnny McGee, put together a community task force, people who actually worked with Dr. Murph and were under his leadership in the NAACP youth councils. And so what is on there, maybe people are mentioned, but I don't know for like exactly if her contributions were mentioned, but people are mentioned who work with Dr. Murphy. It's not just about Dr. Murphy, yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for that excellent presentation. Very interesting. For me, the focus is essentially civil rights, which is pretty recent history in Mississippi, which I think is very good. But there is also a history of Mississippi, which I think that there should be some emphasis on as well. Mississippi in the 1830s and 40s was the richest state in the United States because of the cotton production in the Delta. we hardly hear anything about that. And they ought to, I think, in addition to the excellent work you're doing in the civil rights, I think, you know, we should also think about the history before the civil rights.
Well, they're definitely.
To get a fuller picture and a better picture of Mississippi.
So there definitely are state historical markers that are telling those stories. The fuller, like they're telling the stories that you just mentioned about, like Natchez and other places who were rich because of the cotton economy and things like that. The Mississippi Freedom Trail specifically is focusing on the civil rights movement between 1945 and 1975. That is the state historical marker focuses on all Mississippi history, and then there's parameters that fall in those guidelines, and there are parameters for the civil rights markers or the Freedom Trail marker. So there are markers out there that do that, and I think with the marker system altogether, you're getting hopefully a full history of not just the people, but the events and the music that make Mississippi what it is.
We have some questions and comments from the live stream. Let me pass those along. Do all or most states have historical marker programs, asks Randy Ainsworth.
It really depends from place to place. Not all states have historical marker programs. Some states have privatized ones, other states have them, then they've dropped them. So there is, it varies tremendously.
William Osborne asks for John Spann. I like that Indiana has listed its markers online. Has Mississippi?
Yes. So Visit Mississippi has put the first 32 or 33 online, and we are working with them to put the next 37 online as well. And there's also a map to tell you where each of them are as well. So that's something that we'll be hopefully finalizing by the end of this year.
And then one last from Bill Justice, formerly of the Vicksburg National Military Park. In my experience, the great challenge now is accessibility. The vast majority of historical markers out there can't be experienced by people with mobility, sight, or intellectual disabilities. This is a difficult challenge that is not beyond our means to achieve. It requires careful assessment, consultation, and with the affected communities, and creativity. Ways to empower people to benefit from these, as well as ensuring up-to-date and more expansive interpretation is available, is to provide access to online resources. So,
Yeah.
Excellent presentation on both parts. I'm curious, Brother Spann, about your work earlier, when I think I read somewhere where you'd work with schools and teachers who come in for tours.
Mm-hmm.
I guess my question is, number one, do you still do that? And then number two, if you don't do it, is there somebody in the department that is not doing it? Because a lot of times I've seen students come in and it's almost like, well, this is just a picnic for us. They haven't been actually prepared.
Right. Well, I don't do that with the museum anymore. And they're definitely, like Michael Morris will tell you, they're definitely equipped curators here and educators here that will do that, tell the story with students. And I've been fortunate enough to be lead historian on things for folks for tours throughout the state. But if you're talking about here, they have a capable staff of telling those stories.
Hello, I'm from Grenada, and
Oh,
I
great.
participate in that committee.
Oh.
And I want to thank you and commend you. The level of validation you gave the people who were harmed at that incident is top tier. We've heard, I'm 55, I've heard this story my entire life, but it was almost an urban legend because there was no proof.
Wow.
And now there is.
Amen.
And so I want to thank you, commend you, and encourage you to keep
No.
going.
That I will say that was not me. I will give that back to the community, because if it wasn't for Diane Freelon Foster and your group, your efforts in making that story, keep pushing that and keep persistently telling that story, we wouldn't have had that marker. So thank you to the community for sure.
But I'd also want to say too, when I was, I just want to emphasize how unusual that is. That a lot of times people have been really traumatized or harmed. Their stories are, there's reasons why they don't tell them.
Yeah.
And there's reasons why I think a lot of civil rights veterans, it takes a lot to say what happened.
Right.
And so I think that it's obviously a community aspect, but I just, I can't think of any other kind of, anything comparable.
Yeah. I just to speak, we had the unveiling of the Winona marker on the 8th, and Miss Simpson has not really shared her story that much because of how painful it is. And to have her there, ready and willing to share her story from her words, which again has not been heard of that much, really was just empowering and sobering, because she told it raw like it was. She said she heard every lick, every groan, everything that happened to Miss Hamer and what happened to her, and how she endured, how she persisted, and just to give her that platform to share that story was something incredible, and to give that back to the community and empower herself to continue telling that, because I'm pretty sure that she has been, I wouldn't say afraid, but it was just too painful to share. So thankful that we were able to get that from her.
I know there are more questions. We have gone a little past the top of the hour, but I am sure that the speakers today will stick around for a little bit and be glad to talk to you after. Don't forget our gallery talk tomorrow. Don't forget the Sunday screening at 2 o'clock in this space. And then come back next Wednesday for History's Lunch with Mary Coleman. For now, help me thank John Spann, Modupe Labode.
Thank you. That was a pleasure. Yeah, it's a good time.